What is going on, guys? Special edition here, rocking on a Wednesday. Greg out traveling here for work this week, so there will be no Cover One Buffalo podcast this week. And so I wanted to talk Bills still. I'm used to getting ready and talking Bills on a Wednesday, talking free agency, NFL free agency. And so with Greg traveling and not being able to do our podcast tonight, I talked to producer Chris, who hopefully here is on his way in a second, and said, let's just do spaces here for a little bit since we can't do the show tonight. Side note, for anyone joining, I will be joining Greg. I get to be a guest on Greg's show, so that's going to be fun.
What are your thoughts about D-Hop here?
Here, I want to start on that, and then I'll pass it to the rest of you guys here, because I'm a little torn on Hopkins. I like the player. Obviously, he's one of the most high-end wide receivers of the last decade in the NFL. I mean, if your knock against Gabe Davis is that he can't catch the ball, that is the opposite of what DeAndre Hopkins is. He can absolutely catch the ball. The dude's a baller. He's a beast. He has huge hands. Like, he would be a great addition to this team. I don't know what the asking price is going to be. I'm guessing it'll be decent. But my problem is I don't know that Josh Allen is the quarterback that necessarily DeAndre Hopkins' skill set works well with. I feel like Josh is, I know we don't want to ever talk bad about him or knock him or talk about any of his flaws. I still think he's a little bit of a guy that needs to see people open. He's not a guy that throws with anticipation. He's not necessarily a guy that likes to throw into, those 50-50 balls for players. I think Stephon Diggs is actually a pretty good 50-50 go up and get it type guy. He's shown that he can do that, but you don't really see that. It's, guys have to be pretty open for Josh to get them the ball. And so maybe Hopkins coming just is even pulling some gravity so that Stephon Diggs isn't getting bracketed coverages and that you can do a little bit more. So there's definitely value there, but it seems odd to me in terms of, I think they need more, and they've done it on the back end of that wide receiver room, but it's, to me, getting Josh guys that separate is more important than getting guys that win those one-on-ones.
I think you can find someone in the draft, even if you give up a second for D-Hop, like maybe in the third or fourth round, someone who's capable of getting open in the slot for him. And I think that's what would be the best move for it. So as far as like the actual trade, I'm torn on it too. Just because of the age. Again, you have to see if Arizona's going to eat a lot of that money. You have to see if the capital's going to be too much. But I also think it's one of those things where you don't want to suffer paralysis from analysis. Like, you got to remember who you're trading for, and that's D-Hop. And it's a valued veteran wide receiver who's had success with even some of the worst quarterbacks in this league. So it's one of those things where if they made the move, I would be happy with it just because I love the experience that it's bringing to the receiver room. I love the name. I love the fact that now you can line Diggs and Hopkins outside and just make defenses go crazy, especially in a division where the defenses are getting tougher. I would definitely like the move. It was one of those things, like I said about OBJ signing potentially. It's just got to be the right price. If they're spending, a lot of money on him and giving up a second-round pick, even if it's D-Hop, I think it would be a lot. But again, it's a great receiver, someone that, maybe Allen needs to see a guy open, but you also know who you're throwing the ball to if it's a 50-50 ball. It doesn't have to see him open. If you see D-Hop in single coverage, even if that's tight coverage, I'm still throwing the ball to him because I know he can make a play. So I think there's value to it for sure. I would like to see it happen. I still don't know if it's likely. I feel like this is kind of a smokescreen article, but who knows? Maybe it was.
Yeah, I mean, you got to try to get the clicks in the offseason. It's so, yeah. I mean, the amount of money that you'd have to pay D-Hop just is somewhat like in a vacuum. I'd much rather take the Jeudy deal. I mean, obviously, we don't live in a vacuum. There's all sorts of variables. But it would have to, I'd feel much better about a move for D-Hop if it was a small comp, and it's tough to imagine that Arizona would be willing to part with him. I mean, they've got in 2023, they've got like $21 million in dead cap on this contract for D-Hop, and another $10 million in 2024. But the cap savings is more than the dead money in 24 at least. But it's a big contract. He's going into his age 31 season. I mean, I don't know. To Aaron's point about the scheme fit, I like the player. I think, obviously he's a very talented receiver. He's got those huge hands. He can, we've seen him make some amazing plays over the years, but I'm not like clamoring to have them go out and spend draft capital or players to get a guy who's, um, cost this much against the cap and is entering, age 31. All right, where are we going next, guys?
So Hopkins, sorry, I was just looking it up. Hopkins, my other concern here, and I was just checking, he hasn't played a full season in 2 seasons, heading into the wrong side of your career. That's tough, and I think the Cardinals are going to lose leverage in this deal because of stuff like that. It'll be interesting to see how much of that they're willing to eat in his money too to move it, because I don't know that a lot of teams want to take on that deal. But I do agree that this could just be smoke. It's weird that Daniel Jeremiah is the one that's talking about it. Usually he's on the college side and the prospect side, not so much leaking NFL news typically as much, I don't think, in my following of Daniel Jeremiah. So I'm interested where this came from. It sounds like we also saw interest from Kansas City. We also saw interest from New England Patriots. So maybe this is just drumming up from an agent or the Cardinals to get maybe more of a trade heading their way, that other teams are involved. But in that sort of vein of other teams being involved, is this an opportunity to make a petty move in that, hey, you want to get better at the wide receiver position anyway, there's an opportunity to get a big name, but we can also sort of take that away from, if Kansas City really is on him, do you do a move to prevent another team from getting talent? We've heard teams talk about this in the past where they have been in on a guy. Not that it's never you don't get a guy that's not a fit at all just to be petty, but if it's a fit and all this stuff and they're seeing Kansas City's in on it, do you jump the gun to make sure the teams you're competing with for a Super Bowl don't get better?
I could see that with maybe a different position, but it's kind of like you've talked about here before. The wide receiver is becoming such a replaceable position through all the guys coming up in the draft. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if adding D-Hop versus if Kansas City spends their first round pick on an elite receiver coming up, there's no way we can really stop that. I mean, I guess there is a way. Yeah, no way we can stop it, but I don't love the idea of managing your roster based on what you think someone else is going to do.
Yeah, for sure. This one, it just seems this would get the Mafia excited. The name works. It would sell jerseys. It would create buzz. It would get interest. I just don't know that buying in on aging talent is the right move. I think Von Miller was an exception to the rule, even though he got injured. Just the way he's just such a freak. He looked just as good as he ever did to start the year last year. So that one's different to me. But typically, going all in on aging talent is just not a move that makes a ton of sense to me. But that window's tight. I do think there's a lot of pressure in one Bills drive to find something to get over the hump in the next 2 years. Right I don't believe Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott are on the hot seat, but I think they feel that pressure and that seat heating up.
This is a move you make when you haven't won the Super Bowl yet, right?
It feels a little droughty. It feels a little droughty to
me. That's funny, guys. I got to run. Thanks for answering my question there and bringing that topic up. And everybody tonight, 9:00, we'll be on, and hopefully everybody can tune in and enjoy it.
Yeah, we'll see, man. Thanks for coming on.
It's like Buffalo Bills Reddit said here. The Bills get linked with so many names just because Beane will never dispute those reports. So he doesn't really put any stock into them.
I agree with some of that, but I also do think the Bills are in on everyone. Like, whether it's a legitimate, we're going to make the move. Ian Rappaport said it a couple of years ago. The mystery team is always the Buffalo Bills in terms of checking in and being involved in conversations. I think Brandon Beane takes the approach that I do in life. Like, you don't GET unless you ASK. You don't even know how good of a deal you can get until you start talking to them.
Yeah, I mean, they've got to be constantly checking to see what people are valuing other players at. So, yeah, I mean, I just imagine that Beane and his staff are constantly checking in with other teams
Yes.
and
And I think
agents and
that gets turned into the Bills are in on this guy when it maybe not, it's not always the case that they are in, but they are checking in.
yeah. How much do you want for DeAndre Hopkins? We want 2 firsts. Yeah, okay, that's
Okay.
good to know.
Good
Thank you.
luck.
We'll let you
I
know
mean,
if we'll let you know if we get there.
same with all these teams checking in on Jeudy right now, right? Like, I think there's a lot of teams interested in Jeudy, but then they call the Broncos and see it's still first round. No, we're all set. We're good.
Yeah, yeah. Let us know if you come down from there at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, give us a call when it changes. Um, yeah, Jeudy would still be the preference and for this. And if I was the Bills, there would be no rush to move on DeAndre Hopkins at this point. This would be for me, if I'm the Bills GM. I know we're talking about filling in free agency and doing all these moves to fill your roster so you can pick best player available. I would see how the draft plays out. I would see how this Jerry Jeudy trade stuff plays out and where wide receiver rooms in the NFL look after the draft. Some guys might be getting released here. Some guys might be getting traded or being offered up in trades. So I would play this out and wait. And if another team wants to give a high value for DeAndre Hopkins, congratulations, go for it. I wouldn't be desperate in this situation if I was the Bills. And so I'm interested to see how this plays out.
To Taylor's point here, D Hop better than the next 2 years than anyone in the draft. Sure. Well, he's also exponentially more expensive. I mean, 2023, his cap number is just under $30 million. Like that's that's unsustainable here in Buffalo. I mean, for any move to happen, Arizona would have to eat a ton of cap. It's just it seems a little unlikely.
Yeah, and we can't just gloss over his age and the fact that he hasn't been able to string together a full season in 2 seasons either. I don't believe in injury prone or anything like that, but it is definitely a trend, right? Especially as a guy ages out. So he is currently 30. He will be 31 here during the season. That would be a major concern of mine. Where, yeah, maybe you draft somebody and they are a Sammy Watkins and they start getting injured all the time, but at least you're taking that on the young side of somebody's career. And Brandon Beane has talked about it a number of times. He doesn't always live up to this thing that he said, but early on when he was the GM, he said, our approach is going to be being willing to move away from descending players at the right time and getting in on ascending players at the right time. And the free agency approach to me really seemed to match. Let's get in on some maybe low production, haven't totally produced, haven't fully blossomed guys that we think our pro personnel scouts believe are ascending, and get in on those guys. And that, in my opinion, is the best approach. And going for a Hopkins and giving up assets for a guy like that, he's not ascending at this point. I don't think he's going to come out and have a career year with the Buffalo Bills. Like, he's a good player. He's a name. He gives you stuff that you can do to open up other guys. But I don't think he's going to come out and put up all pro numbers anymore. Like, he's just not that dude.
$30 million in 2023, $25 million in 2024. It's easy to see why Arizona is interested in trading.
Yes. They'd have to absorb some of that money.
They would have
right?
to.
Nobody's taking on those contracts, right? Thomas is
No.
requesting
$55 million over 2 years for a receiver. No.
That's going to be 34 when that money comes in, right?
Jacoby Myers signed the biggest wide receiver deal this offseason. It was 3 years, 33, so $11 million a year.
Yeah.
I mean, and D-Hop is set to make 20, what? My math is terrible. What's 55 divided by 2? $27.5 million a year for the next 2 years? That's crazy money.
Yeah, and I don't know what next year's draft class looks like, but I was told this year's wide receiver class, all college football season long, I was told this class stinks. This isn't a good wide receiver class. I've got like 5 or 6 guys I would love to add to this team. It's just going to be deep every year. 7-on-7 football has just changed the landscape of football. At the young ages, they're playing 7-on-7, and the best athletes are playing wide receiver and quarterback now. And you're seeing that show up in drafts year over year. And so I think I say this all the time with this wide receiver room. I'm happy to run it back as is. Add a rookie, that's fine. I like this wide receiver room. I like our running backs, like Dawson Knox. And I know there isn't a lot in the future for the Buffalo Bills under contract, but I do think you can turn over a wide receiver room in a single offseason because there's so many available every year in free agency. Guys are the Jerry Jeudy trade. Like there's always some high end guy that a team doesn't want to finish that contract on or extend to a major deal because they're willing to come through the draft. So there's always ways to add these high end wide receivers. I don't think you need to get desperate and go grab one just because they're available. Thomas, I see you out here. You requested to speak. That means you must have some great point to bring to us today.
So I love the DeAndre Hopkins conversation, which, by the way, good morning, happy hump day, happy Wednesday. It's beautiful outside. Um, I so one in regards to DeAndre Hopkins missing time, he did have the suspension last season for the first 6 games, and then prior to that, he
Oh,
tore
that's
his
right.
MC.
That's right. That
Yeah,
was
and then
for
prior to
Peds,
that, he
though. That was for PEDs because he's aging and coming off an injury, correct?
he was taking something. I don't. So it was something in regards to. Hold on, I'm pulling it up right here. Um, it's SARM, selective androgen receptor modulator. It's I don't know. It was a weight loss thing. I don't know. He was doing something. I don't think it was necessarily an enhancement. It was something to help his body, and I'm guessing it had something to do with the fact that he was coming off of that MCL repair the prior year. Which other than that, he's never missed time. I mean, he's literally been healthy his entire career, minus the MCL and then the suspension. Uh, the one thing I'd be intrigued to see, because they did lose JJ Watt, is if there'd be some type of flip of Ed Oliver to Cardinals, which would empty 10 million off of our side. And then you're right, if they'd be willing to take some of that cap space. I don't necessarily think it'd be a bad idea. I mean, you haven't seen D Hop regress, which I mean, if you're seeing if he would be on the wrong side of 30 and he was regressing, that'd be one thing. But to this point, he's been just the same D Hop that he's been at any point in his career. He's still been an unbelievable wide receiver. Uh, and as a possession receiver, he was never a speed guy. So I think that bodes well for his style of play in comparison to if it's a guy that was a vertical threat, I think that'd be interesting. The other side to this with the D Hop situation, which I think we have to look at, is going into a D Hop's potential ask was a second rounder. We saw what Brandon Cooks drew, which was a fifth and a sixth, and D Hop is older. And Brandon Cooks has been just as good of a receiver. He's been very, very valued. For some reason, he just never has been able to stick on a roster, which I've never been able to understand. So I wonder if maybe that second round ask has dropped kind of dramatically since all this has happened, and kind of what the wide receiver market has kind of paled in existence to what we thought it was going to be. I don't know. For me, I think the Bills thought this past season when they added Von Miller that they were really just a Von Miller away from winning. And I don't necessarily think that they believe they're that far off again. So maybe if adding a DeAndre Hopkins is just one more piece to that puzzle, I kind of, I know we don't want to be the Rams where we're tearing it down in a couple of years. And I don't necessarily think we would be, because we do have a couple contracts coming off. I just feel like you win a Super Bowl, at the end of the day, no one's going to care how things look. And if Brandon Beane and Jim Overdorf can work the salary cap back to where it was, and you saw what they could do when they came in, I'd be willing to take a shot on a guy that everywhere he's gone has proven to be a nightmare for defensive coordinators.
I want to chime in real fast. I apologize I haven't been talking. I dropped water or spilt water on my phone, and I've just spent the past 20 minutes getting my case off and cleaning it. But anyways, with that point Thomas made, I actually just saw Tyler Dunn's article about how the Bills' philosophy needs to change. And it is interesting because, yeah, they've drafted defense. They've gone for defense. They've tried to fortify the line. They brought in Von Miller, and they still haven't won a Super Bowl. And obviously, that's such a blanketed, obviously there's a million other factors that lead to that. But I like the idea of, well, okay, we've tried defense. We're a defensive-minded team. It hasn't gotten us to where we want to be. What if we just went for the offense? What if we pulled a Kansas City and just kind of made offense the philosophy, where that was what we key in on, that's what we go for, those are the targets and moves we make. And if you go with that philosophy, then a D-Hop move makes sense, especially if it's less capital than you thought it would be, and not a second or third rounder, but a fifth or sixth like Brandon Cooks got, who also was due a lot of money, if I recall correctly. So I could absolutely see that happening with that regard.
Tyler Dunn goes too hard on the Bills sometimes. I'm all for being objective. I think he's got something personal against this coaching staff here because I don't disagree that it's cool to invest on the offense, but let's also not act like they haven't. They swung a huge trade to acquire Stephon Diggs, who's a top 3-5 receiver in the NFL over his time here. Dawson Knox. To me, it's a philosophy change needs to be the utilization of players on the offensive side of the ball. It doesn't need to be an influx of talent on the offensive side of the ball. The Buffalo Bills last year scored 27.7 points a game. Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles were the only teams above them, and they were at 29.2 and 29.1. We're talking about a field goal difference in scoring points, but you're still at the top of the NFL, and it's been that way consistently for 3 seasons, whether it was Dorsey or Dayball. So this idea that like the Bills haven't done enough on the offensive side of the ball, almost every metric puts them as a top 5 offense in the NFL. Can they protect Josh Allen better? Absolutely. Should they invest more in that? I definitely agree on that side of the ball. But this idea that like just go away from defense doesn't matter, we need to just go all in on offense. They already are like one of the top offenses in the NFL.
Number 2 DVOA. The only one better is KC.
Correct. And the offense is what shit the bed in the playoffs. In the last game against Cincinnati, yeah, the defense got bullied around, but you expect teams like Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Kansas City to score 30 points. I don't care what defenses you're running out there. More times than not, they're going to put up close to 30 points. They're averaging 29 points a game. So your offense needs to be able to match that. And to me, the conversation this offseason seems like we're unwilling to talk about like Josh Allen really played like trash in that Cincinnati game, and there was plays to be made on the field and we didn't make them, whether it was whoever on the offensive side of the ball. But we can't act like people weren't in position to make those plays. It was an execution thing. Again, I'm all for adding talent. I'm never going to just scoff at adding talent to the offense and wanting to score more points. I agree with all those philosophies, but let's ground these conversations in reality. Like the Bills are a very good offensive team. They need to get better in certain areas, but the philosophy changes for the Bills, to me, and my whole mode for this whole offseason was coaching changes in philosophy, scheme changes, tweaks, improving over Isaiah McKenzie with a Deontay Hardy, improving over a Jay Kumro with a Trent Sherfield. Like those are the types of changes that a team that's right there on the cusp and just needs to get over the hump need to make. I don't think it needs to be like, hey, we don't need to focus on the defense as much anymore. Let's go all in on the offense. They already do go all in on the offense. Like they are a good offensive football team.
I would much rather see them continue to shore up the offensive line and build, skill positions through the draft. Just because, I mean, the offense is so good already. If Josh had consistently more time in the pocket, it would be that much better. That would be the type of tweak that would take us, I think, over that hump. Like if you can have the time for, these longer developing routes, I've said it here a bunch of times already. Like James Cook and Nyheim Hines, they're both able to run these wheel routes and be vertical threats out of the backfield, which is not usual. I mean, there's not a ton of backs that can do that. You've got 2 of them on your roster. If you can give Josh the time to get Cook or Hines behind the defense and just lob up, let him run under it. Like that's something that defenses have to prepare for. I mean, that right there is a wrinkle that could really open things up.
I agree. It's always been since the end of the season last year. My biggest frustration is utilizing the guys you have. And we could talk about adding a Hopkins. We could talk about drafting a really dynamic wide receiver in the draft. We could even talk about getting Jerry Jeudy. Those are all cool things. Adding more talent doesn't necessarily make you a better team. How do you use that talent is going to make you a better team. And I think they got the guys, to your point. Like I want to see James Cook get going in this offense in the passing game. I want to see Nyheim Hines be the player that you traded to get and get him going. To me, it's criminal, the lack of use of Dawson Knox in this offense and where he is in the progressions in this offense.
Oh, especially with his ability to separate.
Yes. So until those things get better, I think there is meat on the bone for this offense to even jump where Kansas City is at or be on par with Kansas City. But to me, the difference is Andy Reid is one of the most masterful offensive minds in the entire game, and he utilizes his talent and gets them open in space. I say this all the time, Chris. Travis Kelce, especially this year without Tyreek Hill, every single defensive coordinator in the entire NFL spent an entire week or 2 weeks preparing for Kansas City. And their core of their game plan, I have to think, was limiting Travis Kelce. Yet Andy Reid was still able to manufacture this guy touches in space and get him going to have another fantastic season. That's what we haven't seen yet in his first year from Ken Dorsey is we saw stretches where Stephon Diggs sort of just kind of went away, or teams were able to take that away from you. We saw James Cook not be able to get going in the biggest spot where he was sort of seeming like an ascending player down the stretch of the season. And then when you need offensive production, you don't even go to the guy. That is my biggest problem. We see the lack of efficiency from Gabe Davis that everybody on Twitter's pissed about. That lack of efficiency directly correlates with his utilization. And so if the guys aren't being utilized right, I think you could add all the talent in the world. But again, I'll read that Tyler Dunn article when I get off of here. But to me, the change needs to be how you're using guys.
Yeah, I totally agree. The one thing that I would say is that it seems like Kelce might be that unicorn guy that, like, you know, doesn't even need the scheme as much because he's just going to dominate no matter what. Like,
Steph's that guy too. Stephon Diggs, like, there's nobody in the league that can guard him. But I think if you bracket coverage him and try to take him out of the game, and you don't have a creative offensive coordinator to create other problems, then I do think you could limit some of those things. But to me, the biggest difference is Andy Reid's an offensive genius who gets guys the ball, and Ken Dorsey's kind of just finding his way, and this team has enough talent to continue to score 28 points a game.
Yeah, it's a tough comparison. You talk about Andy Reid, one of the best offensive minds in the game, against Ken Dorsey, who just finished his first year calling plays. It's certainly a disadvantage in favor of Kansas City.
Yeah, but that's where. Go ahead.
Sorry, I want to stress, like, I don't disagree with any of what you guys are saying either. I just thought it was an interesting point because going off the D-Hop conversation, I just felt like it's not so much that I don't want them to continue looking for defense, and it's not so much that I don't think the players are on this roster. I just like the idea of, and again, like, I could go either way, whether they did or didn't get D-Hop. I think it's more of just this idea that why not? Like, why not swing and go get him? And, like, I feel like a Jeudy trade's unrealistic. I feel like where they're sitting in the draft, even though I did a whole episode on receivers, I don't think it's likely that one of those major first-round guys are going to be there at 27. I do think you need to protect Allen, and I'm 100% for getting offense and offensive line to make it easier on him next year and maybe get some of those concepts for Dorsey off. But I also just don't hate the idea of swinging and going to get this star receiver who, yeah, he had the suspension and he had the MCL injury, but I kind of like the idea of just, all right, we did the trade for Diggs a couple years ago. He's become a fundamental piece. Past couple years we built in the draft, but now we got what's debatably a star receiver out on the market. Why not? Let's just go do it. And if it works out for us, the same way we saw the Von Miller thing, I guess you could say was working until he got hurt, then great. And then when you get to the playoffs, maybe other components of your offense aren't working. Maybe Cook can't get it going. Maybe the line's not having a great day. Davis is dropping passes. Diggs is getting double covered. But now you got this guy who can open things up a little bit more. So that was really what I was trying to get at with that. I definitely don't disagree with any of what you guys were saying.
Would you give D-Hop a 6-year deal?
Not a 6-year, no.
Because I feel like that's what you almost need to do to like make it. I mean, unless he's going to take a significant pay cut.
I don't foresee a trade with Arizona where they don't need some money. Like, I don't think you're going to put a 6-year deal out there for him. I don't think you're going to do the same thing you did with Miller. But I also don't think that Arizona is in a position where they can give the contract away to anybody. I think they're going to have to eat the money, and I think it's going to be a more palatable thing for the Bills if they do make the move.
DeAndre Hopkins did come out and say that he's not looking to get paid. He's looking to win, and he's willing to work with a team.
Yeah, I mean, he's played with the Texans and the Cardinals his whole career. So, I mean, I know they went to the playoffs when Watson was the quarterback, but man, that's rough. I can see him wanting to get it.
Good that he's saying he wants to just win, but there's still a contract involved here that somebody needs to take that money on, right? Like, he's not just going to he can't void that contract. Somebody's going to have to do something with the existing money. They could do an extension, but again, that's going to get, if he still has a market value, and the players union isn't going to let him just totally undervalue himself either here. Like, there is other dominoes that fall with big players' contracts.
Just stack up that $55 million and set it on fire like the Joker.
Right. I don't know. My thing comes to, like, again, I love D-Hop. I think he's a great player. Last 10 years been one of the best in the league. I'd rather get something that you can supplement the future while still adding to the now, but preparing for Stephon Diggs to not be able to be your number one receiver in whatever it is, 2 years, where you would still have a number one in place would be ideal versus having two aging number ones. But what a great problem to have still would be having two aging number ones. Joe DeRosa, what's happening, dude?
Not much, man. We're live from Blink Fitness again, so I apologize for the background noise you're about to hear if I talk. I'll try to keep my mic muted.
You should talk them into sponsoring spaces since you're there. When we're doing
I'll hit the front desk up. I'll hit them up at the end of this, at the end of my workout.
That's it. I can hear you smashing out there, man, smashing some weight, so I like it. I haven't got to really talk to you a whole lot throughout this free agency process. I know we talked a ton in the offseason leading up to free agency. What's your kind of overall sense, without getting specific into each single player? Overall, how do you feel Brandon Beane has done up to this point in free agency?
You know what? Given the circumstances, and gonna preface again, if my mic cuts out, just give me the heads up. But given the circumstances, I'm pretty pleased. I didn't expect much, and he told us not to expect much, which naturally meant people are going to expect more for whatever reason. Right. I think considering that with limited roster space, cap space, and the fact that you were still trying to make additions to the roster, who he's acquired so far have been great depth pieces. Obviously not world beaters, but good enough for the circumstances we faced. And I think even though we're tight on cap, I like seeing that he's still trying to manipulate the roster to be a BPA situation when we go to the draft. So I'm pretty pleased so far. I'm curious what he still has up his sleeve.
Yeah, for me, the thing that I keep coming back to is like patience and like a methodical approach to this to this off season, and fans don't love that. I know I see a lot on Twitter every day of like he's got to do something bigger, extra to catch up to some of these teams, but I don't think that's the case. And the graph that Kevin Cole continues to put out shows the Bills have been pretty steady, and I think we forget how good this team was last year because of that bitter taste that was left in our mouth from the last 3 games. Really, that whole stretch of games didn't look good. It didn't meet our expectations, but that doesn't mean the roster isn't good or in a good spot. And so the methodical approach makes a lot more sense, especially starting to come up against the cap. Greg, I know you want to get in here and tell me I'm wrong about comp picks and the deals that he's putting out there. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
I'm just curious who's going to get $1.7 million to become a Buffalo Bill today. He's just going around offering that to whoever will take it. And so far, we've gotten a handful of guys to say, "Sure, I'll take it."
He's just standing out there on the corner with like a one of those sandwich boards that says 1.7 million. Be a Buffalo Bill.
I like to picture him being like the cell phone guy flipping the sign around, like twirling it above his head. I think he's got some board twirling skills. But no, I mean I think. You take a look at, I did a tweet showing, hey, we went from Roger Saffold to Connor McGovern. We went from Isaiah McKenzie to Deontay Hardy. We went from Jake Kumaro to Trent Sherfield. We went from, Devin Singletary's overall versatile skill set to Damian Harris's short yardage, bigger back skill set. And like each of those fit what we need a little bit better. And then if you give me a playoff game where we have those little upgrades and Daquan Jones back and Von Miller back and Micah Hyde back, you get Kyer Elam with a full year under his belt with the physical skill set and the reason we drafted him there. I think they're in better position than what it feels like because the last time we watched them play, they got kicked in the teeth and it sucked. But I think that it's easy to let that cloud over everything that's here. And I think it was Chris Seff put out a tweet. If anybody listens to the Athletic football podcast with Robert Mays and Nate Tice picked the Bills as his team having the best offseason because he liked the fact that they didn't try to further mortgage things and that they made nickel and dime smart signings to just upgrade around the edges because they knew they were already a really good team and that's what they needed was to shore up some of the small weaknesses in the little areas. And I just think it's good perspective that when a guy as smart as Nate Tice says that, it's okay to now at least feel okay about it. You don't have to think the Bills had the best offseason of any team. Like, no one's obligated to do that. But at least take that as some perspective of like, oh, well, I guess maybe it's a little bit better than I thought it was.
When was the last time though, like the best offseason resulted in that team? The Bucks, maybe the year they got Tom Brady, but that's sort of an anomaly,
Sure.
right? Like
Well, you had that run
usually
two
we
in a
talked about it
row.
in our show, right?
You had that run 2 in a row because you also then had the Rams trading for Stafford and all the moves that they made back to back with Ramsey and
Right.
Stafford, and then you had Brady going to the. So it seemed like all in splash moves was the way to get a Super Bowl, and now all of a sudden you see those teams completely disintegrating and crumbling to nothing because they got lucky in their risk plays.
Yeah, and we know QB is a totally different, like it should be on its own anyway. If you make a move for a QB, that should be expected to make your team better, right? But you look at a team like the Chicago Bears and the type of variance they added to their roster this offseason, they're probably still going to be like a middling, maybe competing for a possibility at a wild card spot type of team. But they got substantially better in terms of Kevin Cole's graph that he's put.
Yeah, same with the
when
Texans.
you're already really good, it's not essential.
Yeah, same with the Texans. They're going to go from absolutely horrible to maybe almost respectable. I think one that'll be interesting to watch is the Lions. They're one that a lot of people already thought were on the upswing, and they've made some smart moves. I've heard some smart people rank the Browns as having the best offseason in their opinion. So I think that's going to be interesting to watch with the year of Watson, with practicing and with the team. But I think it's okay to feel a little bit better about the Bills offseason than what many are feeling deflated.
If the Browns land Jeudy, that would be pretty big. And we're all going to look like idiots, actually, when Brandon Beane pulls off a trade in the middle of this Spaces and we're talking about how methodical and responsible he's been.
It's tough not to get better when you have $75 million in cap space, to the point about the Bears.
Correct. Well, and I mean, to Aaron's point earlier,
I don't know. The Colts for years have had a ton of cap space and gotten worse.
Just rolled it over and didn't use it.
Correct.
Now look at how they probably wish they had.
The Colts are kind of an anomaly, though, right? Like
most teams
they're kind of like. Aren't they kind of like what the Bills used to be in the Ralph Wilson days?
Yeah, cash versus cap. We have to be smart with our money.
I don't think the Bills were trying to be smart with money. I think they were just cheap back in the day.
It's nicer to say smart. That's what I like to say. So, real quick, I'm about to board my plane. To Aaron's point earlier about the comp picks, I think it really shows that I think Beane is a little more conscious of it than a lot of people were talking about, because too many of these contracts are very specifically just under the comp pick threshold. There's too many of them that it certainly looks like he's conscious of it. We'll see if they go for a released edge rusher or released linebacker, if they make any other signings. But it certainly looks like right now he wouldn't mind that extra third-round pick next year. And I did at one point question, maybe it's simply not in their equation and they don't care. And I do think that the last handful and the exact numbers that they've come in at shows that there's at least a consciousness and an interest, even if it's not, some like primary strategy.
Sure. All right, so where are they right now? Can you?
We're still
it's even right now. Right?
Well, it's pending Devin Singletary. So depending on where Devin Singletary is, if Singletary comes in above 2.5, which his contract was up to 3.75. So if it comes in above 2.5, we will be -1, and we will have a third-round pick as of now.
And that's 2.5 cap hit in his first year.
Correct. It can't be not likely to be earned incentives. It can't be stuff that he gets later on. It's got to be the amount of cash he's paid this year.
Yeah. And then, but that could be offset with we saw David Edwards visiting last night.
Yep. Although I think the numbers that if he would come along, and the fact of what we saw Trent Sherfield and Damian Harris sign for, I would be shocked if he got more than $1.7 million.
And the Bills haven't really had a chance at a third round comp pick, right?
Correct. That's the first time we've had anyone of that caliber leave. We haven't had anyone leave and sign for any number that would have been. There's a couple years we could have squeaked out a 6. This is the first time we've ever had someone leave and sign for $18 million.
That's the big thing where I'm like, joke around with you and say, hey, Brandon Beane doesn't care about this. This is the year to care about it, right? Like if you are going to try to get some deals that are friendly to that, a third round pick is a substantial lottery ticket, where a 6th round pick is kind of like, okay, I don't know that at this point we need another 6th round pick that is going to actually break into the roster. It would probably be a practice squad type guy. But a 3rd round pick, now you're talking, okay, we could get somebody to come in and compete at a position of need.
I'd like it noted that Aaron doesn't care about Christian Benford. So I do think, honestly, until Jordan Poyer's market came back to the point of where it is now, I believe that would have also been part of this equation, that they were planning on probably a 3rd and a 4th if he was going to go sign a $10 or $11 million deal. And that instead he comes back for literally half of what everyone's projection was. So that just kind of changed their equation. But all right,
that's a way better win than a 4th round pick.
Oh,
right?
For sure. And that's the smart way to talk about it, is that, hey, you don't spite yourself by losing talent just to try to eke out a draft. Because let's say they went that route, and let's say Jordan Poyer signed his exact deal with the Raiders, it would have been a 6th round pick. They wouldn't have got so obviously you'd rather have Jordan Poyer for 2 years than a 6th round pick. But if you get up into a day 2 pick, all of a sudden that becomes more interesting. But all right, you guys enjoy yourselves.
Get on your plane.
I'm getting on an airplane.
Have a safe flight. You doing your show
Safe
on Friday,
travels.
Greg?
Yeah, I'm actually I had a hard time getting a guest, so I have a really bad guest on Friday night. But other than that, we are going to still try to do a show.
I'm actually the first paid guest. I just sent over my contact for my agent.
All right, I'll see you guys later.
Later, Greg.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to track the comp picks. I don't think Brandon Beane's done, like he said. I think there's still a chance that we saw, again, David Edwards was in on a visit, was reported. Interesting. Another guy, I've done pretty terrible this free agency period, guys. This is usually where I pride myself in finding guys for the Bills that seem to be fits. Totally missed out on this one. Missed out on a bunch of guys this year, but this would be one that I missed out on in terms of connection. Played under Cromer, number of starts under his belt. Would be a really interesting guy to bring in. Eric did a nice little rundown on him on Twitter from a while back that he reposted last night. Just an interesting guy, but there's going to probably be another chance to bring in a linebacker here. There's still some linebackers out there. I think Brandon Beane, to the point Joe made earlier and that we've been talking about, he's going to fill as many of these holes as he can prior to April's draft so that he can get in line for best player available to a point that's as much as possible, right? So the comp pick thing is going to be interesting to watch, but I do think while he's monitoring it and he is interested in getting it, I do think he prefers to build this roster out for the draft than necessarily grabbing that extra pick. One thing that's going to be interesting in that comp pick formula, where does Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips end up? Jordan Phillips coming off of surgery. Saw banged up Bills post that he's not in his sling anymore, so it looks like he could be ready for training camp. But where's Shaq Lawson end up, right? Like that would be one where, another guy you lose. I couldn't see him getting a huge contract and maybe counting towards the comp pick, but you never know what teams are going to do out there. What do you think for Shaq Lawson, guys?
They could end up back with us, to be honest, and that wouldn't make a difference on the comp pick formula, but
right.
We still need that. We still need help on the interior D line. I don't know where they're at with Phillips and bringing him back or not. But same with the edge. Those guys they filled roles last year, and it doesn't seem crazy to me for them to be back on the roster.
Yeah, I think Lawson, given the tweets that he's put out over the past week or so, it's definitely indicated to me that they haven't tried to make an offer, because I feel like they would have by now. But I wouldn't rule out him coming back or Phillips coming back entirely. I just feel like at this point we've seen Beane be patient and try to get the best value for whatever free agent signing he can get. So I think it's going to be more of the same for them, where let him test the market, let him sit there, and if no one takes him, we'll throw the vet minimum at them and get him for a good deal.
I think it's also a type of player issue. And this was my issue with bringing Shaq back. I like Shaq. I think he's a really good rotational defensive end. But you do have Boogie Basham under a rookie contract still. And you have AJ Epinesa, who they seem still very much invested in. I do think AJ Epinesa is actually better than Bill's Twitter believes that he is. His production hasn't necessarily met the level of play at times. I think he can get pressure on the quarterback. But I think they want more guys like that than a guy like Shaq Lawson, especially with the idea that Vaughn could be out, maybe. We don't know how long that's going to be. I know Vaughn will say he'll be back as soon as he can, but realistically, if we look at other ACL injuries, go back to Trey White's injury, it could be fully up to a year. So that could run into the Thanksgiving, November, December, depending on where he's at. I think you need another bendy pass rush type guy, third down pass rusher to match with Greg Rousseau there.
I got to ask you guys a question. I know Eric's listening here. Would you rather trade for Jerry Jeudy or sign OBJ?
Trade.
100%.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the OBJ is cool, but to me, that's like a patchwork. Let's really go all in the next 2 years on a super, where Jerry Jeudy, you could really stagger Stephon Diggs' contract with Jerry Jeudy and move on from Diggs in the future, not now, but in the future, and have a number one wide receiver. Because you would probably extend him, you would get him on a big, long contract, and then you'd have a number one in place of Stephon Diggs while you continue to funnel in talent, where I think OBJ is cool and you might get him for a year or two, but then you're losing him and Stephon Diggs probably in the next couple of years.
Yeah, you're going to get OBJ. You're going to pay him a lot of money up front for someone who's 30 years old, on the wrong side of it, who's had knee injuries. There's a huge risk there for essentially money that you could be paying to Jeudy year by year. So if you had OBJ and you got him for 2 years, let's just say 15 mil or 16 mil, and you're throwing him $8 million a year, and you have to, pay for the risk. Whereas if you get Jeudy and you sign him to an extension, and maybe you gave up a second pick or a second in next year's third, yeah, you'll pay him the same money, but you're also going to have a 25-year-old receiver with insane upside, which to me was worth its weight in gold and is much more worthwhile to trade for versus signing someone who you don't know what you're going to get. He hasn't played football in a year, so I would much rather trade for Jeudy.
Yeah, the caveat being the comp for getting Jeudy, of course. I mean, it seems like Denver's price is probably too high at the moment. It should come down if the longer this goes on. But yeah, assuming that the comp is reasonable, I totally agree with you guys. Bringing Jeudy in makes more sense to me than OBJ, and I'm kind of down, to be honest, on OBJ. This whole situation has just been dragging on forever and ever, and I don't know. It's just not really something I feel like I need the Bills to be in on.
It seems like he's vastly overvaluing where he's at, which I get. Like, you have to have supreme confidence in yourself to even be on this level, and he's played at the highest level. But it's almost like the Cam Newton coming out and throwing and talking about how he's still one of the best 32 quarterbacks on the planet. It's like, dude, it's one thing to have confidence, but it's another thing to have a little bit of self-awareness, right? And it feels like maybe OBJ is kind of walking that fine line of self-awareness. Like, he did a whole tour. No teams took then. Nobody's really taken yet. Like, maybe he's overvaluing himself. So maybe that value comes down and it's not a substantial value as we think or he thinks it's going to be. And I also do think Denver is playing the same game a little bit with their value that they have on Jeudy. Seems like there's a number of teams interested, but they're not interested at the number that Denver's looking for. So I expect that value to come down maybe as we get to the draft, after the draft, where we see wide receivers, where they fall, where teams end up there. But I think that asking price for Jeudy is going to eventually come down. And it's just smart business. If you're not going to retain Jeudy, it would be really dumb of the Broncos to not get anything for him, right? Like, getting a second and a third would be way better than missing out.
We saw A.J. Brown and Hollywood Brown get moved during the draft last year. That could be something we see with Jeudy and this draft season.
Sure, seeing how the board falls, maybe the guy, the Bills or the Browns or whoever's in on this Jeudy idea, maybe their favorite two guys are off the board before they get to pick. And then, that increases their willingness to, maybe beat Denver somewhere. But most likely the Bills are not going to be on it, but it is fun to talk about.
I think they are definitely keen to make a move in the draft. That's been one thing that I almost feel like is inevitable. They have 6 picks this year. There's a lot of holes to fill as far as depth goes, as far as future development. The backside of your defense is getting older. A few members of your D-line, if you decide to re-sign Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson and Von Miller, are all getting up there. I think there's going to be a situation where they're going to want to trade for picks, and I do think that the candidate to do that on your team is Ed Oliver. Everyone knows the $10 million that he's due for the 5th year is just a lot of money that a cap strap team might not want to pay for the production he's put out. I think on draft day, you might see the Bills flip him for maybe a 3rd round pick and maybe even use that to go up further in the draft. I don't know if you guys think the same.
Or maybe one of these 3-team deals, right, where they trade Oliver for a 3rd round pick and then move the 3rd round pick for Jeudy.
Maybe. I have a hard time with these ideas of guys that we're out on still getting value from the rest of the league. I'm not sure what the league thinks of Ed Oliver. I'm still high on him. That number feels a little uncomfortable right now, but I think that you could roll with it. The only problem is when you create that hole of Ed Oliver, talking about like other holes on the team and the back end, when you create a hole of Ed Oliver, then you have to fill that hole, right? Like it's pretty thin along the defensive interior. So sure, maybe you get a pick, but now you have to probably use some substantial asset to maintain the level of play along the interior of the defensive line. So I'm a little torn on that, but maybe it's just resetting the rookie contract on that
Yeah,
interior defensive line.
I was talking with Greg about this when we did a space earlier this week, and I'm with you that the idea, especially when you're talking about losing Edmonds, losing Frazier, and I mean, it's awesome that Poyer's back, but if you now have Oliver shipped off somewhere else, yeah, it's great to get capital in return, but where does that leave you? I mean, Greg kind of sold me on it in the sense that if you like think of it as a combination where you are trading, getting cap space for Oliver, and then taking a portion of that and signing someone like he loves Poona Ford, and there's a few other guys out there obviously that maybe could be good fits that have been in the league for a bit, and you can also draft someone to develop behind them.
I definitely see them going the path of finding one of the cheaper D tackles on the market now and making that trade too, because I think there's, at least in the middle rounds, some viable options to take with that pick, with one of those value picks for a D tackle. But yeah, I think it's trading the contract really. And like, obviously, if it were up to us, we wouldn't, really be. I guess I should say, like, not up to us playing a fantasy world. We wouldn't owe Ed Oliver $10 million and we could bank on the upside, but we can't do that now. And I think it's just a matter of, is it worth it to retain Ed and pay him that money, or would you rather just start from scratch and find a rookie that you can pay a cheap deal and maybe get another pick out of it that you could use for future value, for future, output on your team? That's the way I view it.
But if we don't want to pay him the money, is there anyone that does? Like, is he good enough to make a trade for and then get an extension on? Like, is the team going to bite on, hey, we got to get this guy before he hits free agency? Because that's really where trade value is going to come in for these guys. That's why you want to get in on a Jeudy, because you don't want to compete with other teams in free agency for his services. You want first right and then deal with the contract extension then. I like Ed Oliver. I think that he's a really disruptive player. I just don't know what his value is around the league. So it's fun to talk about, but is there a team out there willing to take on that contract and make that trade?
Yeah, of course. I mean, and you might look to one of these teams that still has a bunch of cap space, like the Bears or the Texans, that might want to bring in. I mean, Oliver was a top 10 pick. There's got to be other GMs out in the league right now who still think highly of him. Like, is his return going to be a 1st or 2nd round pick? No, of course not. But I think there are probably a handful of teams that would be willing to take on that cap for the rights to, for getting him on their team for a year and the exclusive negotiation rights for that year to try to sign him up long term.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would definitely do it, but again, I just think it's one of these things that creates a hole. I like Poona Ford. I don't think he's Ed Oliver. You draft the guy. There's a couple guys I like in the draft that might take time to develop. You're in a win now window. It's a tough one with Ed. I understand the financials of it. Moving on from him would make sense in terms of getting some cap space back, getting an asset back in return. It's just a weird timing a little bit with that move coming to fruition, but something you might see for sure. He's definitely the guy on this roster that's going to get traded if you can move a player.
100%.
But let's circle back. I think we got a little ahead of ourselves today. I wanted to really circle back to what we've already done here in free agency. So we heard from Greg a little bit. We talked to Joe. Chris, I want your opinion here on sort of just the overall, not necessarily breaking down each single guy here, just Bills free agency. How are you feeling where this team is at from where they started in the free agency process?
Well, I don't really want to repeat everything that you guys said. I agreed with pretty much everything, just kind of that building around the edges, really careful, methodical moves to improve the team. I think it's been great. The thing that, the big question mark for me is the linebacker position, the middle linebacker position. I mean, you obviously glaring loss. We're talking about, our first shot at a third round comp pick because Tremaine Edmonds was that good of a player and got that good of a deal somewhere else. So what are we doing with the middle linebacker position? We know that Brandon Beane doesn't like to go into the draft with glaring holes. He doesn't like to draft for need, or at least that's the party line, right? That's what they say. And that's, I think, their ideal, right, is to be able to take best player available. Right now, the way the roster stands, it feels like they have to take Jack Campbell or Trenton Simpson or one of these guys with their first round pick. And it's not a position that feels, natural or comfortable for Beane and his staff. So I'm really, really curious to see what happens. Most people think that they're going to bring in a vet at some point. Is that going to be before the draft or after the draft? Again, like before the draft makes more logical sense if you're talking about using free agency to fill needs, and the draft for, best player available, bringing the best talent in for the long term. But it just seems to me like it would have that's the most urgent. That's the biggest loss and probably the most urgent need from the beginning of free agency. So it's curious to me that there hasn't seemed to be as much urgency. And I guess obviously we don't know where they are in terms of who they've made offers to that have signed elsewhere. But
it sounded like they were definitely in on Levante David, at least contacting and in conversations with him. We heard early in free agency before he re-signed. My problem with both free agency and the draft, and maybe I'm just not as good at it as some other people in terms of scouting these guys and looking at this stuff. The linebacker draft to me doesn't, outside of the top end, especially with Campbell, it doesn't feel like a great opportunity to get a guy to fill that role for me.
kind of
Free
thin, right?
agency, it feels thin to me, and so did free agency this year. Like I know a lot of people are in on a Bobby Wagner. It just felt like everything I looked at was still a pretty substantial drop off. And maybe you get a guy that's better than Terrell Dotson, but there's part of me that almost says you spent a third round pick on Terrell Bernard. If you're not going to get a substantial upgrade in like a Jack Campbell type guy, let's develop that and pour money into that asset and hide that weak link. You got Jordan Poyer back. You're bringing back continuity in that back seven. You've retained most of your core of your defense. Can we kind of hide a young developing player within that and let him develop as a third round pick so we can see if he's even worth it? So maybe in the future we can move on. I think if you don't hit early in the draft, you're not getting a substantial enough upgrade to not just roll with a guy like Bernard.
That's interesting because CB2 has kind of been that position for years where the Bills have sort of hid someone who's sort of like of average talent, right? Levi Wallace, Dane Jackson, these type of guys who we love. I know they're like your guys, Aaron. No offense.
Yeah, come on, man. Come on.
But no, I'm just kind of curious. Like now that you've got,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like now that you've got Trey White and Kaiir Elam on the outside, you feel like you've got more talent on the outside. Does it give you a little bit more? And I don't know, this is a question for someone like Eric, I think, who has a little bit more of a handle on like the X's and O's of the game. But can you use the scheme to, like you said, hide the like one of your linebackers who isn't as seasoned as the other guys?
Or maybe not even hide, but maybe you change up your approach to match the strengths of a guy like Bernard. Like maybe you're bringing a little bit more blitz, more aggressiveness to your defense and allowing him to do what he does best, which we saw in a lot of his college tape, was get to the quarterback, blitz, and be disruptive. So maybe that's where the change happens. If they're not able to land a guy like Campbell or one of the high end linebackers in this draft, because I don't think you're getting better necessarily through free agency. You're going to get older and experienced. That doesn't always equal better play, especially in the modern NFL.
Yeah, you don't have an option out there to improve from Jermaine Edmonds. That's for sure.
Right, for sure. We got If the Walls Could Talk. I'm guessing this is Josh.
Yeah, hey, Aaron. Guys, I don't know if you saw or if you addressed, I popped on a little late. Daniel Jeremiah just had a video out that the Bills are the #1 landing spot for DeAndre Hopkins, which I thought was interesting. It was on NFL Network this morning, and they just tweeted out a video on that. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we're going to be filling in tonight for you guys. We did an interview with Sal Capaccio talking about his his football journey, how he grew up here and came to be the sideline reporter for the Bills. We had a fun 45-minute talk with him. So we're going to air that tonight at 9:00 in place of your guys' show. And I just kind of wanted to let everybody know of usually we air in the afternoon, but we're going to be in prime time tonight.
Love it. So make sure you're checking out. They're taking our spot while Greg's traveling. Sal Capaccio, friend of ours. I see him all the time at floor hockey passing by, so I get to talk to Sal quite a bit.
Yeah, he was super fun, and we took the angle of, instead of just talking about current stuff, which you guys do so well, we really went back into Sal's career and kind of his interesting journey, and it's kind of neat to have a Buffalo guy make it to the big time, I guess, and then be able to come back and be the sideline reporter for the Bills and on the broadcasts, and he's just obviously a super down to earth and super nice guy. And I think that that came through, and he got excited to talk about his high school years and going to Syracuse and all that. So a little bit different and stuff that you might not always hear from Sal.
Yeah, I think a lot of newer fans, maybe younger fans, don't remember. I remember, gosh, way back. I was still living in Maine. There wasn't a lot of Buffalo Bills content or news. You had the really crappy WGR app that was their own internal app back in the day that never worked. And Sal started, I was really into watching people stream on Justin.tv. This was 2006 or 7, around then, I'm thinking. And Sal Capaccio, he had some other dude that was his producer, and he would stream once a week, and it was fun. It was fantastic. He broke a news story. He had to source something at one point.
He broke the Terrell Owens. He got the scoop on Terrell Owens. Yeah, and that was kind of his big. Yeah, it's good memory. He's the guy who somebody gave him that scoop, and that's kind of how he gained some more notoriety and some credibility. That he had Terrell Owens before anybody else.
Yeah, it was fun, and I talk to Sal all the time because it really, a lot of people probably won't remember this either. Pierre Gabbert and I had a show called Hanging with the Herd in 2011, and it was really the first Buffalo Bills YouTube show. And so we sort of, not to say we started it, but it started with Sal with live streaming, but then there was a void for a number of years where it didn't happen. And then we took it on again. So Sal and I talk about that all the time of how far back live streaming goes. And he was really, I got to give him credit. He was the first to see a live streaming platform and say, hey, let me go on there and talk about the Bills and see what happens. So it worked for him. And so we love Sal, friend of the show, had it on a number of times. So looking forward to watching that tonight since I won't be on. So Big Baller Beane jumped in here, asked to speak, and I've been ignoring him here for a second. But let's see, what do you got? Because then I got to bounce, guys. I got to go get my kid. So let's see what you got, and then we'll wrap up here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'll say this about D-Hop is, didn't he restructure with the Texans before the trade and then restructured again with Dallas? And then, and aside from that, I agree with what you were saying, Aaron, is I think the roster is there. It's just, injuries were bad. And then I think just a lot of it's on Dorsey, him using the weapons he has. And, his first year play caller, you're going to have that. And unfortunately, it's in this big time with this big roster in this quote-unquote window. But I think a lot of it's on Dorsey. And going with Dorsey, what do you guys see going on with personnel usage as far as with the addition of these receivers and possibly, getting one higher in the draft and then not seeing much happening at the tight end? Do you see them sticking with pass happy with the receivers and, utilizing Dawson Knox and a little bit of Morris and kind of losing the 12 personnel idea that so many talk about sometimes, or just getting your opinion on what you think is going on in the tight end room and idea usage.
It's tough for me to know what exactly they have in mind. Eric brought up a really good point too. We think of this offense as the Dable offense still because we saw a lot of similar stuff, but you did see some changes. And Ken Dorsey doesn't come from the Brian Dable coaching tree, right? So maybe there's some stuff just philosophically that he sees different than Dable that he's trying to bring to this offense. And maybe some of that will open up things as we go forward. It will be philosophy changes. I know for years we've been trying to get some 12 personnel involved. You saw the signing of a Damian Harris, who people smarter than me are saying that he performs best when the quarterback's under center. Makes a lot of sense to run some 12 personnel, get a running back with a fullback under center, and have some dynamic playmakers where you could really keep a defense on their toes. So maybe some of that will come out here this year as he's got a full year. The growing pains of that first-time offensive coordinator was something that I know I had concern with. I know Eric had concern with. A lot of people just said, they were like, we have to keep Dorsey at all costs. We can't go backwards with this offense. But my concern the whole time was now you're going to have the growing pains of a first-time play caller in game, being able to make adjustments. I think the utilization of Dawson Knox to me is the biggest point that shows they weren't necessarily using guys right. Early in the season, he was brought in to block a lot, which he's a good blocker. That's fine. But in the progressions, you would see videos that Eric would do, and Dawson Knox would be the fourth progression in a ton of these plays and a ton of the stuff. And he's just too valuable of a weapon to me to be that far down your progressions for Josh Allen, especially when you look at what they were rolling out for wide receiver a number of times a year ago. So I'm not entirely sure the conversations that they're having in terms of utilization, but for me, I want to see them take more input from the players. We hear all the time about the players have leadership councils and all this stuff. I would think that the players were saying stuff like, hey, we got to get this guy involved. We got to do these things. We're seeing this stuff happen. That's why I think you saw Stephon Diggs so frustrated in that Cincinnati game along the sideline. Listen to these guys. We know that's what Brian Daboll did, right? They specifically put in place. Cole Beasley brought plays from college that he liked, and Brian Daboll put those plays in. I think we need to see more of that. Some player-driven leadership, like, hey, this is what I'm good at. This is what we're seeing in both sides of the ball. I think the defense gets overcoached at times too, and the players probably could tell them to back it down a little bit. So hopefully those are the areas we grow this offseason the most, which get them over the hump. Nobody else wants in on that one?
No, I think, I think it's when he came to the point when Big Baller Beane made that point about, like, are they going to shift the run more? Like, what is their really game plan? I don't think you're ever going to see this team not be pass heavy, right? But
Yeah.
I would like to see them offer some more wrinkles in the running game. And I think Harris does, to your point, Aaron, give them the chance to run more 12 personnel. And I do want to see more utilization of Knox, but I also want to see more utilization of just two tight end sets in general. Like, really, I think they could find in this deep tight end class in the draft someone who could line up on the other side, and whether they're a blocker or go out as a receiver, there's just so much potential for this team to have kind of an unlimited array of plays that they could use and mismatches they could create. Like you guys have said this entire time, that talent's there. Excuse me, I'm out of breath. That talent is there, and they could make it work. And I just feel that last year when they brought in O.J. Howard in free agency, the light bulb in everyone's head went off, and they were saying, wow, we're really gonna go heavy with these tight ends. I'm really excited to see what they come up with. And whether you want to blame Howard or the fact that they couldn't figure out how to use Howard, which I don't think is the case at all, it didn't happen. And then this year you saw kind of a neglecting of Dawson Knox until maybe the end of the year when it seemed like he was starting to get it going a bit more. That's really the one thing I want to see more out of Dorsey is just use those tight ends. Use a second one. Make things easier for Allen. Because even if you have, two tight ends going out as receivers, I just feel like you're going to get somebody open no matter what you do. Just the mismatch will be there. And if you go ahead and get a Sam Laporta or a Schumacher or a Kuntz, like all of these guys could be day one contributors for you if you use them as such.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think the run game was better last year than people are giving it credit for, especially in stretches. There was a bit of a stretch, I want to say around like halfway through the season, maybe week 6, 7,
It was
8.
his first few games after Josh hurt his elbow.
Yeah, you started to see some real efficiency out of it, and you started to get better. Sort of bringing it back to the people bringing up Tyler Dunn's article, and again, I haven't fully read it yet, but where I would want to see talent added to the offensive side of the ball is along the line. I think that opens things up. I think you're seeing it. If they bring in a David Edwards here this week, which they had him in on a visit, Connor McGovern, I think, is an upgrade from Roger Saffold. I think they do something at tackle. I don't think they're going to stand pat with the tackle position. I think that we'll maybe address that in the draft and add somebody to compete for starter. But then you see, again, pretty substantial improvement year over year from the offensive line if you do all those things and they pan out the way we expect them to. So I could see more production coming from the ground game just because they're getting a little bit better along the offensive line and maybe adding some tweaks and wrinkles, some 12 personnel, getting a more physical back and Damien Harris going, things like that. So taking some of that pressure off Josh, taking some of those snaps off of him. But I don't think it was the running game was as bad as we feel it was. To me, my problem was they went away from it when they probably needed the most in that Cincinnati game when Josh couldn't get anything going on offense. They also just James Cook disappeared. They didn't even get him involved at all. Like that, to me, that's the type of stuff that's unacceptable. You have playmakers that you have to find ways to manufacture touches if the offense isn't getting going. And they just were unable to do that. When they got stagnant, they just relied too much on Josh to do Josh things. And I don't think that's the way to win in the NFL. Like Patrick Mahomes, when they're struggling, you see them start to dial it back and find him easy touches, easy layups. It's just like any basketball player. Like if you're slumping and not hitting threes, you got to get some easy buckets. You got to manufacture some jumpers from the elbow. You can't just launch threes all day. And that's what it felt like this offense was doing, where anytime the things were getting stagnant, they just let Josh go out there and run around and make plays. And sometimes it worked, but when it comes time to big games and big moments, that's a lot harder to do. So I want to see them find easy layups for Josh more often, and that would be the philosophy changes. And that comes in some of it comes in through the run game.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see after this first off season, after having a full year of play calling under his belt, and scheming, right? Because it wasn't just Dorsey. We had Aaron Cromer came in. This was his first year with the team. We've got just after Dayball left, like there's just a lot of movement on the offensive side of the ball in terms of the staff beyond just Dorsey, and it takes a little time, I think, for that stuff to gel. I'm curious, after this season or during this season, if things don't make some improvement, people are gonna riot. First of all, but I think it will start to get more realistic, more reasonable, I guess, to talk about, like, all right, is this really the right people we have running this thing?
Yeah, I agree. This is the year you're going to find out, right? Like, I think the seat will get hotter on Dorsey if they don't see more, not relying on Josh to do the big plays and taking some of that pressure off him. You'll see that seat will probably be the first one to heat up, I would guess. So interesting stuff. I do got to get going. I got to split. I got to do a couple things here before I run out the door. So I do want to say I appreciate everyone. Joe, thanks for coming on while you're working on. Chris, as always, thank you for your time. You got anything coming up here this weekend?
Yeah, Joe, you want to plug your show?
Well, if you would be, let me have the space for a second. No, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for having me. And this Saturday, 11 a.m., Under Review is back. I took a week off last weekend. Had a wonderful time in Mystic, Connecticut, Aaron's neck of the woods, or old neck of the woods.
That's it.
But yeah, man. But this weekend we're going live, talking about some free agency review, some what's next. A really fun, laid-back discussion this week. I'm super excited. I got Joe Miller coming on, so we're gonna have a good time. Tune in on all of our streaming platforms, and I'll see you guys soon. I got to run right now as I have to go to work, but thank you guys for having me. Go Bills. I'll see you soon.
Thanks,
all right, guys.
Joe. Yep. And real quick, I mean, I know that the Sabres have pretty much packed it in, but we're still doing the watch party on Friday night. We've been having a ton of fun. Honestly, like, we talk about the Bills We did a deep dive into the Mighty Ducks last week. It was a great time. That's playback.tv/cover1. We'll be there Friday night.
Perfect. All right. On that note, guys, we're out. We'll probably space out again maybe on Friday. Maybe we'll get some news. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins will be a Bill. Who knows where things will be at? Maybe I think DeAndre Hopkins is the new OBJ in spaces, so that'll be interesting to see how all this goes. But I appreciate everybody coming out, tuning in, listening. I appreciate all you guys, and go Bills.
Go Bills. But don't go anywhere, Bills fans. We got a brand new episode of The Film Room coming up right now. Keep it locked on Cover One YouTube.